The chamber fell into stunned silence the moment Denzel leaned forward, a folder thick with documents gripped firmly in his hands. Cameras flashed, pens froze mid-scribble, and all eyes locked on the confrontation unraveling in real time. $300,000, he thundered, his voice echoing like a gavel strike. That's the unpaid debt hanging over your campaign, and the American people deserve to know why you're still hiding it. Karoline Leavitt, once confidently perched behind the microphone, suddenly looked cornered. She tried to fire back, calling it a smear, but her voice wavered under the weight of the numbers laid out before her. Denzel pressed harder, each word slicing through the tension like a blade. This isn't about party politics, Karoline, it's about accountability. Who benefits from those hidden contributions? Who owns your silence? And why should voters trust someone drowning in financial shadows to speak for them? The chamber erupted. Some senators gasped, others muttered under their breath, stunned by the bluntness of his attack. Social media exploded instantly, clips of Denzel's fiery words spread like wildfire, trending within minutes with hashtags like #DebtGate and #DenzelVS.Leavitt. Leavitt shuffled her papers, desperate to regain control. This is politics as usual, she said, her tone defensive, but Denzel wouldn't let up. No, this is about integrity. Leadership isn't for sale, and tonight the truth is no longer yours to bury. By the time the session ended, the chamber wasn't just rocked, it was shaken to its core. Denzel had turned a number into a weapon, and the sound of that $300,000 figure would haunt Leavitt long after the lights dimmed. The fight wasn't just political anymore, it was personal, visceral, unforgettable. The chamber no longer felt like a Senate hearing, it felt like a courtroom, a stage, and a battlefield all at once. Reporters leaned so far over the railing that security had to step in, and every camera was locked on the duel between Denzel and Karoline Leavitt. What had started as a hearing about transparency had exploded into a moment America couldn't look away from. Denzel's presence grew larger with every word. He didn't shout for effect, he didn't need to. His calm but razor-sharp delivery carried the force of someone unwilling to be ignored. He lifted the stack of documents again, tapping the table with precision. These aren't rumors, Karoline. These are filings, these are names, these are numbers. And every dollar that goes unpaid chips away at the trust this nation places in its leaders. Leavitt's face flushed. She raised her chin, trying to summon the poise of a seasoned politician, but the cracks were showing. This is a witch hunt, she said firmly, hoping the phrase would resonate with her supporters. But the chamber murmured, unimpressed. The phrase had been overused, and Denzel seized the opening. A witch hunt, he shot back, leaning forward, his voice steady and deliberate. The only witchcraft here is how you turned hundreds of thousands of dollars in campaign funds into an invisible debt that refuses to die. The people aren't hunting you, they're demanding answers, and you've given them nothing but excuses. The crowd stirred, some gasped, others clapped before being hushed by security. The intensity was no longer just political theater, it was a cultural flashpoint. Tweets and live streams carried the showdown outside the chamber walls, into coffee shops, classrooms, and households across the nation. And then Denzel delivered the line that would echo through the night: leaders don't run from the truth, Karoline. They face it head-on. Tonight, your debt isn't just financial, it's moral. The room shook, not from noise, but from the silence that followed. A silence that felt heavier than thunder. For a moment, Karoline Leavitt looked cornered, her eyes darting between the senators in the chamber and the cameras broadcasting to millions. But she wasn't ready to fold. She straightened her blazer, leaned forward, and unleashed her counterattack. "Mr. Washington," she said, her tone sharpened like glass, "you're not an elected official. You don't sit in this chamber as a senator or a representative. You're an actor, a performer. And what you're doing right now is nothing more than a performance designed to humiliate me. The people watching should remember that." Gasps rippled through the audience. A senator on the panel shifted uncomfortably, others leaned in with anticipation. Leavitt's gamble was clear: paint Denzel as a Hollywood outsider meddling in politics, discredit his words by tying them to celebrity rather than substance. But Denzel didn't flinch. His calm gaze locked on her, and a faint, almost imperceptible smile crossed his face. Then he leaned into the microphone, speaking slowly, deliberately, as if he wanted every syllable to etch itself into the chamber walls. "You're right," he began, his voice steady. "I am not a senator. I am not a congressman. I am a citizen. And in this chamber, in this democracy, the citizen is the highest authority. You serve us. You answer to us. And right now, I am voicing what millions of citizens are thinking but cannot stand here to say." The chamber erupted. Reporters typed furiously, and hashtags ignited across social media. Hashtag Citizen First began trending within minutes. Leavitt, visibly rattled, attempted to retake control. She raised her voice over the commotion. "You're twisting this. My campaign debt is a technical issue, a bureaucratic mess. Nothing criminal, nothing corrupt." Denzel's response came like a hammer on steel. $300,000 is not a typo. It is not a misplaced decimal. It is the weight of promises unkept, contributions misused, and accountability dodged. Don't insult the intelligence of the American people by calling it technical. The crowd roared. Even some lawmakers who had been silent began whispering to each other with furrowed brows. The tide was shifting, and Leavitt could feel it. The air in the chamber grew heavy, like a storm pressing down on the walls. Karoline Leavitt gripped her notes, her knuckles widening as she tried to steady herself. The camera zoomed in close, catching the flicker of unease in her eyes. Her voice cracked slightly as she forced the words out. "This is not corruption. This is not betrayal. I have dedicated my life to fighting for conservative values, for the people who feel ignored, for the Americans who still believe in faith and freedom. My campaign ran into financial hurdles, yes, but that does not make me a criminal." Some in the audience nodded, but others frowned, unconvinced. Denzel waited, silent, letting her words hang in the air before he delivered his counterblow. "Karoline," he said firmly, his voice echoing through the hall, "this is not about left or right. This is not about conservative or liberal. This is about integrity. When you take money from the people, you are not just holding dollars, you are holding trust. And trust is more sacred than any campaign slogan you've ever uttered." A murmur spread across the chamber. Senators shifted in their seats. The weight of his words pulled the spotlight back to him. Leavitt swallowed hard, trying to find her footing. "You think you can shame me into silence?" she snapped. "You think Hollywood lines can erase the fact that I represent real Americans? You don't know what it's like to fight for every inch in politics, to be attacked from every angle, to have your mistakes turned into scandals." Denzel leaned forward, his tone like iron wrapped in velvet. "I do know what it's like to be attacked. I do know what it's like to be judged unfairly. But here's the difference, I never asked people to give me their last dollar to keep me in power. You did, and when they trusted you, you buried them under $300,000 of unanswered debt." Gasps filled the chamber again. A senator slammed his pen down. Reporters in the gallery exchanged glances. This wasn't just testimony anymore, it was a reckoning. Leavitt's shoulders sagged, the defiance in her voice fading. For the first time, she seemed to realize she was losing more than just an argument. She was losing the narrative. The chamber was silent except for the sound of pens scratching across notepads as reporters captured every word. Karoline Leavitt shifted in her seat, clutching the edges of the desk like it might keep her afloat in a storm. Her smile was gone. What remained was a brittle mask, cracking under the weight of Denzel's accusations. $300,000 in unpaid debt is not a hurdle, Denzel said, rising to his feet. His voice thundered, sharp and measured, echoing against the wood-paneled walls. It's a betrayal. Every unpaid vendor, every volunteer who believed in you, every citizen who thought their $20 donation meant something, they all deserve answers. The camera panned across the senators, their expressions grim. Even those usually aligned with Leavitt looked uneasy. Leavitt fired back, her tone sharp, desperate. You don't understand. Campaigns are messy. Every politician has debt. I fought hard, I sacrificed everything, and I am still being targeted because I refuse to play by Washington's rules. Denzel leaned forward, eyes locked on hers. His words cut through the air like a blade. This isn't about rules. This is about respect. Respect for the people who trusted you. Respect for democracy. And respect for the truth. The room erupted in murmurs. One journalist whispered to another, "She's cracking." This could be the soundbite of the year. Leavitt slammed her fist against the desk. "You think you can stand there and judge me? You're an actor, not a senator. You live in the comfort of fame while I fight the sharks of politics every single day." But Denzel didn't flinch. His calm was unshakable, his delivery relentless. "Fame doesn't shield me from accountability, and neither should politics shield you. When the people give you their money, they give you their faith, and when you break faith, you break the very spine of democracy." The audience gasped. Some stood up, clapping softly, unsure if they were witnessing history or theater. The tension was unbearable, the chamber split between loyalty and outrage. Leavitt's eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally. But the silence that met her plea said everything. Her defenses were collapsing, her excuses falling flat. And Denzel, standing tall, looked every bit like the voice of a people who had finally had enough. Karoline Leavitt's hands trembled as she shuffled her papers, as though somewhere in those sheets was a lifeline strong enough to pull her back from the edge. Her voice cracked slightly, but she forced herself to speak louder, desperate to reclaim the room. "You want the truth? Fine. I inherited a broken system. I inherited advisors who lied to me, donors who pressured me, and a machine that chews people up and spits them out. I did what I had to do to survive." She slammed the papers down, the sound reverberating through the chamber like a gunshot. Some in the crowd stirred, nodding faintly, as though part of them wanted to believe her. But Denzel wasn't about to let her escape. He stood, his presence towering, his gaze locked like steel. Survival is not an excuse for betrayal. Struggle does not justify deceit. And when you say the system is broken, you're right. But you became part of that system the moment you stopped fighting for the people and started hiding behind debt and excuses. The chamber went still. The clash of their voices felt less like debate and more like a trial, the air thick with judgment. Cameras zoomed in, every network knowing this would run on repeat by nightfall. Leavitt tried again, this time softer, almost pleading. "I didn't steal. I didn't pocket that money. I fought with every ounce of my being. Doesn't that matter? Doesn't that count for something?" Denzel leaned across the table, his voice dropping into a low, commanding tone that carried the weight of a verdict. "What counts is accountability. What counts is integrity. And what counts, above all, is the people's trust. Once you break that, no speech, no excuse, no sob story will bring it back." The crowd erupted, half in applause, half in stunned silence. Reporters scribbled furiously, their pens scratching headlines into history. Leavitt's face paled. For a moment, she looked less like a politician and more like someone caught in a storm too powerful to withstand. Her composure shattered, and the reality of her crumbling credibility hung heavy in the air. Denzel sat back down, his expression calm but unyielding. It wasn't triumph, it was truth. And the truth had just dismantled the last shield Karoline Leavitt had left. The silence lasted only a second, but it felt like an eternity. Then, as if a dam had broken, the chamber exploded with noise. Half the audience roared in applause, stamping their feet against the marble floor, while the other half shouted in defense of Karoline Leavitt, their cries echoing off the vaulted ceiling. The cameras panned across the room, capturing the clash of raw emotions that transformed the Senate chamber into a battlefield of conviction. News anchors whispered urgently into earpieces, while producers waved frantically behind the glass of the press box. Within minutes, hashtags were climbing to the top of every social media feed, hashtag Denzel exposes debt, hashtag Leavitt on trial, and hashtag people versus politics. The story had jumped from one chamber to an entire nation in real time. Leavitt sat frozen, her lips trembling but her words trapped behind them. Her aides leaned forward, trying to whisper strategy, but their voices were drowned out by the thunderous crowd. One reporter shouted, "Is this the end of your career, Karoline?" The question pierced the air like a dagger. Denzel, however, did not bask in the uproar. He lifted his hand calmly, signaling for silence. Slowly, the audience quieted, the force of his presence pulling the chaos back into order. "This," he declared, voice resonant and steady, "isn't about Democrats or Republicans. It isn't about who sits in what seat. This is about honesty, about trust, and about whether the people in this chamber remember who they serve." The words landed like thunder. Even Leavitt supporters lowered their eyes, as if confronted by a truth they could no longer ignore. Then came the sound that would replay on every network for days, a slow clap. One by one, members of the public gallery rose to their feet, their applause deliberate, defiant, and unrelenting. The chamber shook under the force of ordinary citizens making their judgment clear. For Karoline Leavitt, the noise was deafening, not applause, but a verdict written in the sound of unity. For Denzel, it wasn't victory, but vindication, proof that the people still recognized truth when they heard it, and they would not be silenced. Within an hour, the Senate chamber confrontation had spilled beyond its marble walls and onto every screen in America. Cable networks cut their regular programming, social media feeds burned with clips of Denzel's booming words, and podcasts scrambled to release emergency episodes dissecting the clash. For millions of Americans, it wasn't just another headline, it felt like the unveiling of something they had long suspected but rarely seen so plainly exposed, a system cracking under the weight of its own corruption. Outside the Capitol, protesters gathered almost instantly. Some carried signs reading, "No more secrets," and "Debt is betrayal." Others simply held up dollar bills with bold black letters scrawled across them, $300,000. Helicopters hovered overhead, capturing the swelling crowd, while chants rose like a wave, "The people first. The people first." In diners across the Midwest, in barber shops in Atlanta, in classrooms in Los Angeles, the debate consumed every conversation. Parents asked how leaders could preach responsibility while drowning in unpaid debts. College students demanded to know why campaign finance laws seemed written only to be broken. Even conservative talk radio hosts, usually quick to circle the wagons, admitted on-air that Leavitt's silence during Denzel's strike had been a brutal moment. Meanwhile, Trump's allies, sensing a storm, scrambled to shift the narrative. They issued statements about unfair attacks, called Denzel Hollywood gone rogue, and tried to rally their base around the idea of persecution. But the footage of Leavitt's stunned silence was impossible to bury. It was raw, undeniable, and replayed in a loop across every network. And Denzel? He remained silent after leaving the chamber, his only gesture a raised folder of documents that spoke louder than words. No grand press conference, no fiery follow-up, just the image of a man who had said his piece and left the truth to do the rest. That silence became its own form of power. Across America, one sentiment echoed louder than the noise of partisan spin: if they can be exposed in there, maybe there's still hope for us out here. The following morning, Karoline Leavitt appeared before a crowd of reporters outside her congressional office. Cameras snapped, microphones jutted forward, and the air carried that electric sense of a nation waiting for an explanation. Her staff had prepared a statement, neat and rehearsed, but the exhaustion on her face betrayed how heavy the last 24 hours had been. She began with practiced words: "This so-called scandal has been blown out of proportion. My campaign faced the same challenges every candidate does," but her voice lacked conviction, each sentence swallowed by the echo of Denzel's fiery call-out. Every time she mentioned challenges, reporters shouted back, "What about the $300,000? Every time she said misunderstanding, someone countered, "Why hasn't it been paid?" The questions sliced sharper than her prepared remarks could shield against. Sweat glistened under the lights as her tone wavered, shifting from defensive to frustrated. "I will not be intimidated by Hollywood theatrics," she snapped at one point, trying to paint Denzel's intervention as nothing more than a performance. But the crowd wasn't buying it. Social media was already ablaze with side-by-side clips, Leavitt deflecting in front of cameras versus Denzel holding up the damning documents with calm authority. The contrast was devastating. In living rooms across the country, Americans leaned closer to their screens. Parents shook their heads, whispering, "She's dodging it." College students live-tweeted, "Denzel spoke truth, she's just spinning." Even allies within her own party began to distance themselves, issuing tepid statements about the importance of transparency, without mentioning her name. And then came the turning point. A reporter asked a simple, direct question: if the debt is nothing more than politics, why hasn't it been repaid? For a split second, silence fell. Leavitt's lips parted, but no words came. The pause stretched, heavy and unforgiving. That silence, not her words, became the headline. By the end of the day, every network carried the same story: Leavitt falters, Denzel's challenge still unanswered. By the week's end, the uproar had grown into something far larger than a political skirmish. Across the country, town halls filled with angry citizens demanding answers, protests lined the steps of state capitals, and the phrase, $300K debt, had become a national shorthand for hypocrisy in politics. In cafes, on buses, in classrooms, Americans were talking not about Hollywood versus Washington, but about truth versus deception. News networks replayed the moment Denzel raised the folder of documents like it was history in the making. Commentators called it a line in the sand. Editorials declared that his words, "No more secrets," had already outlived the hearing itself. Even those who didn't agree with his politics couldn't deny the raw power of that confrontation, one man standing in a chamber built for power, refusing to let silence bury the truth. Meanwhile, Leavitt's attempts at recovery only deepened the wound. Every new interview, every forced smile, every vague explanation seemed to underline the fact that she still hadn't provided a clear answer. Her debt wasn't just financial anymore, it was moral, public, and inescapable. In contrast, Denzel stayed quiet. He didn't tour the networks or deliver flashy speeches. Instead, he let the documents and his unshakable moment in the Senate chamber speak for themselves. That restraint became its own form of authority. People began saying, he didn't need to yell. He didn't need to drag it out. He just showed the truth, and walked away. On the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, a candlelight vigil was held, not for a death, but for accountability. Thousands gathered, holding signs that read, "Truth is debt-free," and "The people deserve better." The crowd chanted Denzel's words back into the night, their voices rising into a single, undeniable echo. And as the cameras rolled, one image sealed itself into history: the Capitol dome illuminated against the dark sky, the people chanting, and the unmistakable sense that the balance of power had shifted, if only for a moment. The story would be debated for years. But the verdict in the court of public opinion was already clear: when the silence of corruption met the voice of truth, the truth rang louder. In a nation built on freedom, truth can't be silenced. Tonight we saw that no title, no office, no privilege can protect someone from accountability. The chamber may have quieted, but the echo of those words, "No more secrets," will live far beyond these walls. This was more than a debate. This was a reckoning. And America will not forget.